Welcome to Minty Living's weekly podcast, The Superiority Complex. We go over tools, tips, tricks, and secrets that have helped us build a scalable, profitable, and successful vacation rental management company. This week, we're going to talk about guest experience, what has been incredibly helpful for us, what has been critical to our success, and we're going to share those tips and those tricks with you. If any of the information that you find here is, of course, valuable to you, please comment below. Tell us things that you would like us to add, things that you would like us to talk about next, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast and this channel. Minty Living, by the way, is a vacation rental management company. We have about 170 units under management. We are Atlanta's largest furnished vacation rental management provider. We have 4.9 Google stars and, of course, hundreds of reviews, upwards of 400. And we are also Airbnb superhosts, and all of our properties are listed on platforms like Marriott Homes and Villas. And, of course, a majority of our bookings, more than 2/3, do come from direct sources. So this is something that we've done and that we have scaled.
I'm Sidra. I'm Minty Living's co-founder, and my background is interior architecture and design. I'm usually focusing on design and demand for Minty.
And my name is Benjamin. I am Minty Living's CEO, co-founder, and of course my focus is around the technology side of things, data architecture, automations, and measurability of a very big and very complex system. So today, let's talk about guest experience. Why don't you share with us, high level, how you've gone about building such an incredible brand around guest experience?
I think the number one thing, of course, is communication. It's also knowing that no matter what you do or no matter how hard you try, you're still going to get a bad apple in there somewhere. And those bad apples, unfortunately, are cropping up more frequently with the current ecosystems and platforms that are rewarding that type of behavior, quite literally. So it does all start with communication, and the first line of defense in any guest experience where something starts to go awry is proactively reaching out to your guest or picking up the phone and trying to resolve that as soon as you sense a change in the temperature of how things are going.
And I know that you've, of course, trained our entire team on conflict resolution, and you have very strong held beliefs about what medium of communication is most appropriate given the level of escalation. Can you share some of those tips and tricks?
Yep. The more intense it gets, the closer the communication needs to be. So if it's a light issue and your guest doesn't seem to be that irritated, text is fine, right? Just responding in a timely, respectful, helpful manner is totally okay. If it's repeated and you start to sense a tone of frustration or irritation, bringing it closer is better. Picking up the phone and calling them. If it really escalates, go over or send someone in person to talk to them. Bring it closer and closer, the more challenging it gets.
And is there also an element of seniority that you're trying to use with guests? So in other words, they may be speaking to a remote team member, and if it begins escalating, it's important for you to ensure that somebody with a title is kind of taking the escalation from that point on?
Strategically, it could go either way. So sometimes you actually can even be that manager and hide behind a lower title and use the I need to speak to my manager to create a little bit of buffer or distance in that response. It really depends. It depends. Regardless, we would want to know about it. So the first piece of framework for guest experience reps is to flag situations that are starting to deteriorate.
And when you speak about creating this buffer, it's really helpful, I think, as vacation rental managers. You're advocating for two parties. You're necessarily, you care about the guest. Their reviews and their experience is very much going to impact your brand and how people see your brand when you begin to aggregate those reviews. But you're also advocating for your owner. You're also managing an asset on behalf of another individual. Are there other ways that you're able to create buffers in communications that leverages those different dynamics?
Knowing the tolerance of your owner as well is really important. And your tolerance as a company, because we're not making any money if our owner doesn't make any money. So we are more aligned with our owner financially, but then very much dependent again on guests booking with the public brand experience. A no can be really important to share with guests, a very gently phrased no, because it can be helpful for everyone to know where they stand at some point. If you're finding you're like circling around and around and around and can't land at resolution, the guest is asking for a completely comped stay or something that is really unreasonable, but still keeping it professional is really important.
And so when you go through the conflict resolution, when you train the team, and I think it's certainly an incredibly valuable continuous loop to build with any vacation rental management company, is this continuous feedback loop of how do you deal with conflict resolution. People will be dealing with it, of course, with owners and also with guests. So share with us where that framework comes from, how you think about it. Is there a process that you apply? Maybe walk us through a little bit about what conflict resolution looks like for you.
Yeah. So we've read a lot of books in communication, and one of the ones that we read at one point was Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, and he was one of the lead hostage negotiators for the FBI. So it sounds a little ridiculous to say we use hostage negotiation tactics with our guests, but we are. Yeah. Voss outlines one of the first steps being empathy, and he calls it strategic empathy. Other types of courses in communication will just call it radical empathy or empathy. If it helps for you to think of it as strategic empathy, to be able to supply it and to get out of your own way, then do whatever you need to do. But first is to empathize or try to see the situation from the guest's point of view, because our goal is not to be right in some emotional conflict. Our goal is to create a positive guest experience. So we don't necessarily get to be right. We get to flex the muscle of compromise and all this stuff in order to get what we really want, which is a great 5-star review. So the first step is empathy. The second step, if it's not clear what the guest wants, is to ask what successful resolution would be. So usually at that point, it's a little less clear than just fixing a toilet flapper, right? That's clear what the guest wants. Yeah. They want a functioning toilet, or stove, or fill in the blank. So it's usually progressed several steps beyond that, and they're asking for greater and greater levels of compensation or resolution or early cancellation or switching, and sometimes it's not that clear. They're just complaining.
Yeah, well, and I think you bring up a good point around the strategic empathy, or really just empathizing. And I think it's certainly a way of communicating that we're not accustomed to. It's so easy to get charged when somebody, it feels like
feel defensive.
Yeah. Exactly. It feels like someone is coming after your brand. Someone is coming after.
It's very personal.
It feels very personal. And it can be hard in those times times to take a step back, which I think is a wonderful technique where, especially when there's a little bit of distance, maybe the initial communications are happening via SMS or via WhatsApp, depending on what type of a communication platform you use.
Or Airbnb.
Or Airbnb,
Yeah.
Exactly. In taking a step back before you click send on that message. And I think that's something that we often corroborate and try to bounce off of each other, where if we sense there's any kind of a charge with the message that we're sending, we take a step back. We encourage the other person to step back. And with that, the empathy piece, I think, is one of those things that isn't entirely natural, which is to try to reflect what we think the person might be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, it seems like you're really frustrated that the cleaning team was late for your in-residence clean. And suddenly you do something like that and another piece of information pops up. Well, yeah, I am really frustrated. I have an incredibly tight schedule, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, this is about the amount of pressure you're under for work and the schedule, and now you can use that as a way to get to the next step. So,
and another thing that's very helpful too, just in that emotional dialogue as well, is the guest thinks that they're like fighting you or fighting us, right? And it can be very disarming for the next response when things start to get a little hairy and you get those additional pieces of information about what's going on and why they might be feeling that way, to give some sort of statement like, we're on your side. Mm-hmm. Don't worry, we'll fix it. We've got it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can really open up people to be helped. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they close themselves down and they become less and less helpable. Mm-hmm. And it can help to align yourself with your guest. Sometimes it really doesn't matter, and even though they've made it clear what they want out of the situation, you've gotten them to articulate, well, what would successful resolution look like? And instead of 25% that you're perhaps willing to offer off their stay, they say 75% or 100%, and there's no way you can meet the goals of safeguarding the owner and doing right by your company and meet their request.
Yeah.
And that gets a little bit more complicated. That becomes a no, and then it's going to be brand management theretofore, because you're going to have someone who's pissed off.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about that? I think that's a great next piece to speak about, which is you have your frustrated guest, and of course there is an element of channel dependency. Depends on whether the guest has booked on Airbnb, whether they've booked on Vrbo, whether they're direct booking. Tell us a little bit about crisis management, if you will, or putting out fires where you feel like a guest may be untractable. You can't bring them back.
Yeah. Airbnb is going to be the biggest problem because of how they've set up the platform as this, public auditorium, and in our opinion, really show preference to the guest, right? The guest is their money maker. Mm-hmm. The guest is where Airbnb is getting most of their income from. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of their income from. And because so much supply comes in through the Airbnb platform, the hosts are just kind of like captive to the platform. So the hosts largely roll over in order to accommodate the demand, mm-hmm. because they're desperate for demand. Mm-hmm. So the Airbnb platform is the most problematic for reviews, and reviews being used for guest extortion. Mm-hmm. So much so, like the platform's really become this Judge Judy of guests are now trained or very aware that you can show up to an Airbnb and just start snapping photos and sending them in, and there's all of this recourse, and they've got their hosts up against a wall, and they can immediately start asking for money off mm-hmm. of their stay. Yeah. And it's very unfortunate that it's bringing in a lower quality of guest at this point. But the other platform platforms don't do it. Airbnb really caters to this guest extortion factor.
And it certainly has become almost a modality of cost savings. So it's almost as though I can go online and I can find coupons.
Yeah.
And the coupons, when I go and I purchase at this vendor, is going to help me get a discount. And it really has become a form of remuneration.
Yeah.
Certainly not with every guest. Absolutely not. But it does appear as though there is a swath of individuals that have clearly identified, yep, I can use this as my coupon code, and they've got the drill down pat. So what do you do when number one, how do you identify one of those individuals? Obviously, it can't be a perfect identification process, but how do you identify them, and then what do you do when you feel like you likely have one?
Mm-hmm. Well, and also just to gently clarify, Airbnb immediately solicits response from a guest at arrival of, did anything go wrong? Is anything, not to your liking? So they are solicited to provide negative feedback right from the beginning, how it's phrased. It's not just, are you having a great stay? It's soliciting negative feedback. So it's a not small percentage of guests that immediately have been trained to become squeaky wheels. So I do feel that Airbnb is facilitating this type of interaction. One of the tips and tricks with this type of Airbnb guest, first and foremost, is to flag the guest to Airbnb. It's literally a Aikido move where you take the force of the guest and then turn it right back into the platform. So it does a couple of things. If the host flags a guest, a problematic guest, it goes into a different type of queue than when the guest flags it. It also allows you to be proactive rather than reactive. As soon as you become reactive on the platform, you're going to have less and less resource behind you and ability to change the direction things are going. So step number one, you've got a squeaky wheel guest, and you can spot them from a mile away. They immediately start texting in pictures of the smallest little things.
And you're saying they text it to us,
or on the Airbnb thread. Oftentimes they'll do it on the Airbnb thread. Yeah.
But that's something, if we think about the sequence of events, they're sending a photo to you via Airbnb around the photo, which is an indication that,
they're going to
okay, it's time for me to preempt what I see as potentially being a move in the direction of this person thinks they have the coupon code to get their discount.
And they literally arrive with that mentality. They arrive, like they're detectives, and they're going to find their money off the moment they walk in the door.
Yeah.
Another indication too is like, before they arrive, them already questioning rate or being like, oh, that's so expensive. Oh, I'm really stretching it. And then just, they dispute the rate. Then they want all these extra free things like free early arrival, free luggage check, free late departure. And they are already showing that they're deeply displeased with the rate that they've booked at. And they're going to look for some money off.
It's interesting because that to me almost seems like a reveal of the true colors more than it does a strategic move. So the snapping of the photos, that's clearly a strategic move that is indicating, okay, they're making an effort to try to get a reduction in their price. Whereas, again, I don't walk into a sneaker store and find a $130 pair of sneakers and say, would you take this for $30? No, the sneaker is $130. Like that's just the price. And certainly with what's gone on from the market dynamics and this ability to discount rates, I think it's a great point to say, okay, this is not necessarily intentional, but they can't help themselves that they feel like something is going to cost too much or trying to get you down more and more and more on price. I think that's a fabulous way to identify a potential issue when someone's coming in the door.
And then the last one too is, mistakes can happen. in, and the tone can change, right? And you have a guest who something occurs, it's not resolved to their satisfaction, and the tone gets more and more aggressive, and it's indicating that they are less and less happy. That's especially, and if you are genuinely trying and you've deployed resource, you've attempted repairs, you've resolved it, and there's still this tone, or it's like lots of little things you're still saying no to, like, you fixed my toilet, but I need extra, do you have flour in the kitchen? Well, no, we don't stock flour in the kitchen. Well, do you have, milk in the kitchen? No, we don't stock milk in the kitchen, and you're sensing this tone of disappointment, even if it's totally unrealistic. That's the next reason of proactively reach out and flag these guests and flag your concern as a host and set the case number. Like, there is a case created that you can go back to. So that's the number one thing. Then if, things proceed and they make it clear that they're wanting remuneration, otherwise they will, quote, leave a bad review or fill in the blank. It's some sort of kind of threat. It can be a quiet threat or it can be a heavy threat. Like, it could be a quiet threat of, 25% off my stay is not satisfactory. It's very clear that there's something more that's needed to be satisfactory. It can also be explicit of, I will not leave a good review with this amount of compensation. And the clearer you can make it that they are wanting compensation in exchange for a positive review, you can actually kind of snare them, again, while the guest is in residence. And
this is all with Airbnb.
On Airbnb, yeah. You can make it explicit of, are you saying that additional compensation is needed in order to leave a positive review of our company? And sometimes they just say yes. And then it's like, oh, thank you, I won't pay you a dime. Because you immediately can flag that to Airbnb, go back and get that review removed. Lastly, if the guest has departed and that's where all the nastiness comes out, and it's just, again, you've deployed recess, you've tried, and it's clear you've tried in your interactions, and the review comes out and it's still not fair or is inflammatory, you need to basically have the Airbnb review guidelines memorized of what would disqualify a review. And that's, I can summarize them quickly because I have them intimately memorized. It is a biased or unfair review of which retaliation or extortion, coercion are very much in those categories. So someone goes off the handle and, they're retaliating for the rules or policies that you enforced that are clear. One example is, a guest left us a 1-star review. Beware of hidden fees. Read the rules carefully. You will be charged for things. So this was a great example of retaliation where we've made it abundantly clear that these are additional services that they are requesting for a fee. We've listed it in multiple places. We then have record of communication, of communicating these fees, and they're still retaliating. They still booked, and then they were displeased, they were charged, and then retaliated for being charged. It's a retaliation. Extortion, I want money off in order to leave you a good review. And bias of you guys are... it's clearly sour. The other category is not relevant information, i.e., it doesn't have anything to do with their stay. So the home was beautiful, but the neighborhood seems like it might not be the best in Atlanta, and it left me very concerned. Well, it's not about the host or the home or anything to do with their stay. They're just speculating about some random neighborhood in Atlanta, speculating it's, quote, not safe, but they had no experience that indicated them being unsafe. So that would be a an example of not relevant information. And then the last is just harassment, explicit language. So if someone's using explicit language like pseudo swear words, just flag it for removal. It's violating it.
So it sounds like if we were to maybe break this down into a process, which I think is clearly defined, certainly for you and for the team, and you've got it nailed down in your mind, is number one, you're trying to identify if you think this may be somebody who's a high likelihood of trying to get their additional coupon by
A guest threat.
Yeah, through what we call the extortion factor. But you're trying to identify those individuals. If it is one of those individuals, you are looking for an opportunity to preempt an issue and raising that with support. It's a critical piece of ensuring that that gets done. And then the final pieces are if someone is trying to make sure that you leave they will only leave a positive review for more compensation. And then the final piece is if there is any of the rules, the terms and conditions of reviews are violated, that's kind of your last effort to have one of those removed.
Yeah.
That could negatively impact your profile and of course the property.
And it's quoting that language to the Airbnb
Always
reps.
And
literally their words for them, you know.
And I think that also is a big one with Google. So they also have their terms and conditions around what reviews can be about and cannot be about. And I think it's also very similarly, we can, of course, link to that in the description below for both platforms. But I think those are great ways to try to, again, you do your absolute best to ensure the greatest guest experience with everyone that comes through your doors. And there is a risk management component of when somebody has not effectively reviewed your service and talked about something that is more tangential, there's a way you can get that removed.
Maybe you could share a little bit about how we've scaled technology to also increase our positive reviews, because that's the other way of offsetting negative reviews, is having an abundance of really good reviews to counterbalance them.
Absolutely. So a lot of these different communication platforms give you the ability to, number one, create forms, and number two, create conditional logic on those forms. So I send you a form, and the form says, hey, how was your stay? And that is, of course, a proprietary Minty Living form. And when you say 5 stars, you guys are absolutely amazing, the conditional logic then pops up with a very easy to navigate to link to, hey, here's our page on Google. Would you go ahead and leave us a review? And that's an incredible way to shift the curve, if you will, to ensure that you're getting a positive review posted by somebody who's had a positive experience. And so setting up the automations, the necessary technology to ensure that you are getting that first blush feedback from the guest to see where they are, and then you can navigate a decision tree and say, okay, based on where this person's rating came from, based on where this person's rating fell, I'm going to take them down different decision trees. I'm going to move them towards, okay, great, you're singing our praises. Let's send you to as many different places as we can to speak about your experience and how you feel about our brand. And of course, the more negative, then you're executing a different set of decisions to try to limit that person's ability to negatively impact your brand. And of course, when you have very much put your company out there, like we have, of course, you search Minty Living, and again, there's 400 reviews, and it's kind of the only one. If somebody wants to be able to hurt your brand, they can certainly do that. There's no inability for them to do something like that. So you have to, of course, nail good guest experience, but you also take these mitigation techniques like you spoke about, and then the last piece is to try to mask or sift through the reviews that you're getting to push in a certain direction to ensure that you're getting and amplifying the feedback for people that are positive.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember reading that people are 10 times more likely to complain than compliment. So our natural inclination is to be like, me, 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 It's much more exciting to, rag on someone than it is to be like, oh, you're looking lovely today.
Yeah.
You might have that inside thought, but getting that lovely inside thought outside, just for whatever reason, it takes a little bit more effort.
Yeah.
Those public channels are crucial, and making sure that the good gets out there and is amplified is very much been a secret to our success as well.
Well, thank you to everybody for coming into the Minty Living headquarters for the week and spending some time with us. We hope you found this of value, and of course, we look forward to seeing you all next week.